Okay, looking at the book of Jeremiah this evening, beginning our study, and tonight we will be doing an introduction to the study, and I just really didn't know how else to do this other than do a PowerPoint presentation over it. There's a lot of facts, and if I just read them off to you, I think that if you're taking notes, or at least mental notes, it'll be easier to see from the screen. But looking forward to the study. It is a very lengthy book and just a treasure trove of information. So I think that we're going to all be greatly benefited from a study of this book, what most referred to as a major prophet in the Bible. So let's begin by looking at, that has to be plugged in, but let's begin by looking at an overview of the book. So what we'll do tonight is just an introduction to the study, and we'll see how it goes, and we may very well get into chapter 1, and I'm prepared to go all the way through chapter 1 if we get that far. But if you have things that you want to add, some of your studies of the book of Jeremiah, that would certainly benefit the class as well. So again, this is a class as usual, even though I'm standing up here this evening. Okay, so overview of the book. First 46 chapters of the book of Jeremiah is what is referred to as an oracle or a judgment against Judah. So there's going to be quite a bit to say about Judah, which is the southern tribe or kingdom, and you have the northern tribe of Israel. So at this point, Israel has been conquered by Assyria 93 years before Babylon comes upon Judah, which is the primary thing about the book of Jeremiah. Then you have the final 7 chapters of the book of Jeremiah, which are oracles or judgments against 7 other nations, one of which would include Babylon. Jeremiah's message: Judah will suffer at the hands of the Babylonians due to their sin. And what we are going to read, and especially if you have studied the book of Lamentations, but what we read regarding the absolute desolation and crushing of Judah by Babylon is somewhat difficult. This wasn't just a mashing. This was a total disintegration. I mean, they are decimated. And you get the sense, after studying the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations, of what the fierce wrath of God really looks like. So it's not a pretty picture. And as we go through the book, and there are things happening to Judah, they ask the question, why is God doing this to us? And we'll see in just a moment what their self-view was. They just didn't see that they were guilty of anything, and didn't understand why all these bad things were happening to them. After all, we're the people of God. But they were living anything but as the people of God. So probably if you had to put a finger on a Bible verse that is thematic for the book of Jeremiah, it would probably be, from my perspective, it'd be Jeremiah 10:23. So it's not in a man to direct his own steps. And that's exactly what Judah was trying to do. They were trying to do things as they personally saw fit. So one of the things that I personally like to do when I do Bible book studies is to find a Bible verse that states the cause or the theme of the book. And it's subjective, really. I mean, if we ask Leonard, hey, what Bible verse in the book of Jeremiah would you say really stands out as a thematic verse? He's very likely to come up with a different verse. So there would be no right or wrong answer, of course, to something like that. It's just something that I've gotten into the practice of doing through the years. All right, let's talk about Jeremiah, the prophet of God, for a few moments. Jesus asked a question to his disciples about his identity at Matthew 16 and verse 13 there. Remember that when Jesus said, "Who do men say that I am?" The disciples said, well, some say that you are Jeremiah or Ezekiel or one of the prophets. But the question would be, why would they say that about Jesus? What was it about Jesus that reminded the people of Jeremiah? And once we find our answer to that question, we find out a lot about Jeremiah as well as a lot about Jesus. And those two characteristics that I think that come out of a study of the book of Jeremiah is that he was meek and he was fearless. But we're going to see, just because somebody's meek and fearless doesn't mean that they have the same battles that you and I certainly have. Doesn't mean that there was never fear in him. Doesn't mean that there was never hesitations. Doesn't mean that he didn't get really down about things. And we'll see some of that in just a moment. But one of the fantastic things that comes out of the study of the book of Jeremiah is God's expectation of us, even when things are not going well. And when we read that in a few moments, if you're like me, you just get a little bit of chills within you to read what God says to his prophet that's getting a little bit discouraged. It's like, wow, time to man up. But let's get there. Let's wait until we get there. Jeremiah begins his work 13 years into Josiah's reign as king of Judah, which he comes on the scene at 583 BC, goes through 543, which would be about 40 years. And here's the thing: you study through the kings, and we know Josiah comes on as a little boy, basically, and becomes king of Judah. And through time, Josiah makes great strides that the one before him, Manasseh, had done so many terrible things for Judah. But Josiah makes great reforms, and it would appear that Judah is on the right track. But it's during Josiah's reign that God sends Jeremiah to give all these warnings and to say the things that he has to say to Judah. In other words, through the reign of Manasseh, the people had become so hardened in sin that they had gotten to a point of no return, even though Josiah had made many improvements, spiritually speaking. I guess what we really need to see there is that even though there may be one good man among 1,000, so to say, that doesn't make those 1,000 good. They have to make those changes as well. And Judah did not make those changes for the most part. Also, during the 40 years of Jeremiah, as you can see on the overhead, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, and Daniel were also prophesying at different times during those 40 years. Israel, the northern king, as we said, the kingdom had been conquered by Assyria 93 years previously. All right, Jeremiah's work. Well, we studied the book of Jeremiah, and God gives Jeremiah the duty of going to and preaching to Judah. They must acknowledge their sins. They must amend their ways, and they must repent. So again, I'm putting a lot of Bible verses up here, and if you really would like, I could email these slides to any of you, but we're just going to keep moving through here. But this was his work. You've got to get these people to open their eyes and see what's wrong. They are absolutely delusional. And again, we want to make application of this, don't we? And the last thing that I want, well, let's pause for a moment. Ask you the question, who is the book of Jeremiah written to? Who is it that has all these problems? And who is it that we're talking about when we're talking about a people delusional that are suffering all kinds of terrible things because of their sin? Was it everybody else out in the world? No, this book is just like the New Testament. It's written to God's people. So, whatever's going on out there, they're living ungodly, they're suffering things, and there's no way in the world that they're ever going to acknowledge these things, because they don't have the prophet of God speaking to them. God's people have Jeremiah sent to them. And the message was, you better open your eyes. So he's commanded not to hold back one word of condemnation. The prophet's words would be like fire and the people as consumed fuel. And at Jeremiah 17, verse 18, Jeremiah prays to God saying, bring upon them the day of evil and destroy them with double destruction. And boy, does he ever give them the double destruction, doesn't he? Well, what did they do to deserve this double destruction? And again, I pause here. If you're not familiar with Jeremiah and this double destruction, Babylon will siege Jerusalem for, I believe, 18 months. And some of the most horrific historical events happen during that time. And it's a slow, agonizing death of starvation, cannibalism. There are, as you read through the book of Lamentation, there are mothers that are taking their own children, cutting them up and putting them in boiling pots and eating them as stew. This was reality. It was horrific. Double destruction. But the question is, what did they do to bring about all this on them? Well, I find as I'm looking through the American Standard Version anyway, it states that they were sotish. And that means to be diluted as though you were intoxicated. So again, here are a people, so let's think about it as God's people go. Here are a people that are God's people, but yet they are so delusional that they're practicing sin and think somehow that God's okay with this. No, he's not okay with it at all. In fact, he's very angry. So they were sotish. They had no fear of God. And so every one of these things we're going to say, we see the Bible verses up there to give the verse or the proof, if you will. So they had no fear of God. They had no shame. They had no knowledge of God. So what we're seeing here, this is God's assessment of Judah. Judah has its own self-assessment. But God's self-assessment of Judah is that their great problem is they don't even know the left hand from the right. They don't know me. They don't know the Bible, so to say. They don't know the Word of God. And that's a big problem. They were rebellious, covetous. They practiced idolatry and even sacrificed their sons to Baal. They were liars, Sabbath breakers, covenant breakers. They had completely put God out of their lives. Judah's rulers led many astray with their lies. They did what they considered to be right rather than following the laws of God. Their prophets and priests were wicked. And God had some expectations. He called upon Judah to acknowledge their sin, to seek truth, to stand and obey his laws, to amend their ways, and to repent of their doings. But Judah rejects God's mercy for 25 years as Jeremiah preaches. So what's going to happen is we're going to repeatedly hear Jeremiah say, you're going into captivity for 70 years. This is a done deal. So don't even fight it. It is useless to try to fight this. You are getting your just reward. So God warns them through his prophet Jeremiah, and he said that there's nothing but violence and fierce anger to spill out on the disobedient people of Judah. You know, I pause for a moment, and for anyone who says, hey, this is not what God is about. He's not a God that would do these types of things. He's a God of love and mercy and grace. And so we don't ever talk about this stuff you're talking about. Well, then why don't we just chop the book of Jeremiah out of our Bibles, right? Or chop the book of Revelation out of our Bibles. This book brings out just how fierce the anger and wrath of God is on those who are disobedient. Now, there will be, as we go through the study, bigger pictures. And we'll get to that in a moment as time permits, but we'll see how it is that Babylon, if you can understand Babylon and everything about them, then it will really help you get the book of Revelation. But again, we'll get there in a moment. Lord tells Judah through Jeremiah that they would die grievous deaths. Again, boy, did they ever. Jerusalem would be burned with fire. They would die by the sword and pestilence and famine. God would fight against Judah through Babylon because of the hardness of their hearts. So, again, they would eventually go under siege, and all of these things that Jeremiah said, by way of God inspiring him to say these things, comes to pass. There are a lot of them that die. Well, what was Judah's response? Here, imagine yourself in this day, and maybe, we don't want to imagine this, but maybe we're one of the sodish ones. We are absolutely delusional. And God forbid that would happen today, but it does. We all know it. We see it in the Lord's church. Absolutely delusional people. They believe that they know this book backwards and forward. And the more you talk to them, you realize they don't know the right hand from the left when it comes to the Word of God. So imagine yourself living in this day. You think things are well, but here's this guy hacking on you. So what was Judah's response? Well, they plotted against him. His own family plotted against him. His hometown plotted against him. And the people of Judah as a whole plotted against him. We don't want you around. Your words are depressing. Your words do not encourage us. We can't stand you. He was beaten by the elders and chief priests. He was laughed at. He was thrown in prison, cast into a miry pit and left to die, sentenced to death due to his depressing words. And at his lowest point, Jeremiah considered his life cursed and was at times ready to just give up. This is a study, and I think that sometimes we may have a hard time fitting the actual events into our minds as far as the reality of it goes. But again, the only thing that you and I can do is just put ourselves into the text, into the day, into the time, in the shoes, so to say, of Jeremiah. And I'm saying, if you're Jeremiah, I'm Jeremiah, we are saying some very hard things to these people. As you and I read through the book of Jeremiah, we're going to see he says some pretty hard things to them. They don't like it. And they make his life miserable. And they want to kill him. And they try to kill him. And they beat him. And so you can only imagine, even though you know you're doing what God's wanting you to do, you can't help but get discouraged. It's not fun having nobody like you. Have you ever been there? I have. It's not a lot of fun. And so he just says, I feel like I'm about done. Now, if you've gotten to those points, you may remember maybe what got you out of that. And in what way did you get out of that mode where you were just absolutely discouraged, felt like giving up? I don't want to preach anymore. If this is the way brethren are going to be, and I've been going through this for years and years and years, I think I've put in my dues. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm speaking the word of God, but I get nothing but flack. What does God say? Let's see what he says to Jeremiah. This is what gave me chills. The Lord said, if you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, then how will you contend with the horses? You need to put your big boy britches on and suck it up, basically. I've got work for you to do. And now is the time to do it. Now is not the time to run. Now is not the time to give up. Now is the time to dig in. I need you. And that's what God's saying to all of us, really. He needs us to stand. Take a firm stand. If you give up, what's that going to do for your brethren? What's that going to do for anybody else out there that you have any influence over? If you give up, then you're useless. If you can't run with the footmen, how are you going to do it if you run with the horses, contend with the horses? Solomon wrote something very similar to that. He said, if you faint a day of adversity, your strength is small. I get a little emotional when I read these things because I know what I've been through. I know how I have personally wanted to give up. I'll go out and get a job like everybody else. Forget this stuff. I don't need this in my life. And then I read these types of things like they're here, and what we see are expectations. This is the expectation. Now's not the time to quit. The lesson Jeremiah needed to learn was that his work of saving souls was larger than his own personal life. These are just my words, my thoughts, but that's how I interpreted that. The things that transpire are much larger than your personal life. And I'm just up here, if every one of you had your turn to stand up here and say your experiences, I'm sure, we start over here with Mary and go around, your immediate family has probably thought that you were kind of quacky. Or maybe one of your family members said to you like they told me. They said, I joined a cult when I became a member of the church. So we've all have our stories. And you are sitting in your pew right now, which means you haven't given up. And make no mistake about that, God is well pleased with you. But just, I think that as we look at this, it just says, hey, I got to keep moving. There is no quit. What makes you very special, what makes me very special, is that we don't quit. We don't give up. We keep going forward, even when things are not well. And things will likely never get as hard as it was for Jeremiah or the apostles during the days of the apostles. We're not facing death. Nobody's beating me up. Nobody's taking the rod and striking me. But we deal with emotional things, and that does get us a little bit down. But we read in here and we see what God's expectation is. We need to gird up our loins. Quit ye like men, as the King James Version would say. Okay, so what we want to do is look at Babylon now. As we said, if you study Babylon, you figure Babylon out. You can figure out much of the book of Revelation. I have on here Revelation 17, verse 5. Babylon is depicted as the great harlot in the book of Revelation, of lust, pride, and vainglory. And interestingly enough, we find that Babylon came to power by way of God's power, by way of God's providence. He raises them up. And Jeremiah says that Babylon was God's battle axe in his hand to slay Judah with. Jeremiah refers to Babylon as the ancient city of world renown. It was known for its deities of Bel, Nebo, and Merodach. The influences of these gods are easily detected in the names of the many of the Babylonian kings, such as Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, Merodach, Baladan, evil Merodach. These are just a few of the names of the Babylonian kings. But again, you can see the influence that these false deities had on them. Jeremiah, I think we have planned to talk about Daniel in a little bit, but Belshazzar in Daniel 5 was king at the time of Babylon's demise. But all their kings, they had these false gods as part of their names. The walls of Babylon, you really can't talk about Babylon without talking about their walls. They had an inner wall and an outer wall. The inner wall was known as the Imgur Enlil, and it was constructed of mud brick. It was 21 feet thick and had 100 towers along it in intervals of 60 feet. 20 feet outside the inner wall was the outer wall, known as the Nemet Enlil. And so the outer wall has 12 foot thick, making the total defensive wall 57 feet. 65 feet outside the wall was this moat, as you can see there on the screen, and it connected to the Euphrates rivers on the north and south. You can see that, maybe you can see in the picture the Euphrates going out. So on north and south, it connected to the Euphrates River. This place was impenetrable, and it had iron bars, in fact, in the water to guard anybody from coming in. Also, Babylon was known for its hanging gardens. This was one of the 7 wonders of the world. And Nebuchadnezzar built this for one of his wives because she was missing the vegetation of her homeland. And that's about the best picture I could put up there. You could probably see a lot better ones. But then we look at Babylon's sin itself, and we see a picture of a very ungodly people. And again, we get back to the idea that Babylon was used as God's battle axe, and we get a depiction of how God works. God's going to use things at His disposal that maybe we wouldn't expect. You know, someone would say, how in the world would God want to use such an evil, corrupt nation to do such things? Well, it's going to take an evil and corrupt nation to do what He wants done. This is going to be an absolute annihilation of a people. Babylon personifies evil, much like Edom and Esau was an early name that would personify evil. They considered themselves gods, the Babylonians did. They were filled with pride, covetousness, and they were given to pleasure. Babylon strove against the Lord, destroyed His holy temple, and served vain idols. Now, of course, that will be once the siege takes place, the walls around Jerusalem are collapsed, and Babylonians go in and they just level the temple. And they take out all of its treasures. And so you had the wall of Jerusalem destroyed. Remember, Zerubbabel comes back and rebuilds the wall and the cities, and that's where the book of Ezra comes in, and Nehemiah and so forth. But that would be 70 years later. They're going to stay in captivity for 70 years in Babylon. Babylon believed they were innocent, seeing that Judah had sinned against God's righteousness and were deserving of their demise. In other words, hey, we're in the hand of God. We're the battle axe of God. We're doing God's bidding. And if we're winning, if we're destroying all like this, we must be good. Again, a faulty sense of reasoning, both on Judah's part and on the Babylonians' part. So, you take a step back and say, man, this is a messed up picture all over the place. You got a wicked people attacking another wicked people. People are being destroyed, and everything's going exactly as God would have it to go. And Babylon rejoiced over the fall of Judah. God punishes Babylon. We read about that in Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 18. They put their trust in their wickedness. They look for help from enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers, stargazers, prognosticators. You know, brethren even do that. Sometimes I have talked to brethren, and it almost seems like they believe this kind of stuff. Prognosticators are fortune tellers who tell people's future during new moon each month. They trusted in their treasures, position of the Euphrates River, trusted in their walled city. Jeremiah mentions the walls of Babylon 3 times in the oracle against the Chaldeans at chapter 51. Trusted in her idols, but none of these things that Babylon trusted in would save them. Jeremiah writes, the walls of Babylon shall fall. Yeah, phenomenal walls, but they were going to fall by the hands of God. I have a couple of Bible verses I wanted to read to you, one from Isaiah and one from Jeremiah in relationship to this destruction of Babylon. At Jeremiah 51:53, the prophet of God said, though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the heights of her strength, yet from me shall destroyers come unto her, said Jehovah. And then again, at Isaiah chapter 46, verse 1 and 2, the prophet Isaiah writes, Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. These are their gods, the Babylonian gods. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. Their idols are carried about, are made a load, a burden to the weary beast. They stoop, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. They themselves are gone into captivity. So in other words, these gods were nothing. They couldn't stop anything that was going on. And the prophets bring that out. And so Babylon falls eventually to the Medes. Isaiah chapter 13, verse 17. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, who shall not regard silver. As for gold, they shall not delight in it, and their bows shall dash the young men in pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye shall not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. You're done. You were very wicked. And yes, I used you, but you will now pay the price, because God is God and there is no other. How did it go down? Maybe you remember from your readings of the book of Daniel that Daniel explains how this goes down, and it's referred to in history as the Battle of Opus. Don probably knows all about it. But I'll give you a quick rundown of this. Belshazzar is king at this time, Babylon. And this is at the demise. This is after everything's happened with Judah. And remember, Daniel is one of the ones that are brought into captivity. And Daniel is in captivity. They've been there for 70 years, and this is all about to end, and here's how it ends. You had the Medes, led by Cyrus, who, interestingly enough, was a grandson of Astyages that we recently studied about, which was very fascinating, study in itself. But Cyrus comes on the scene, who Isaiah names far before he comes even into existence, names him by name. And he takes the city of Babylon around the year 500 BC, over a 5-year period of time, gives it to Darius the Mede. And what happened was that this city, with its impenetrable walls, is as it was. You're not getting through those walls. So how did Cyrus get into the city? They go north of the city, divert the Euphrates River, dries it all up, and the soldiers are able to march under the walls. But, you know, if you're like me, you're thinking to yourself, well, how could they do that? Surely somebody sees that this is going on. Well, Belshazzar is a drunken mess, and so is everybody else in Babylon. They're having this great feast. They're all plastered, and you remember what happens. As Cyrus and the Medes are going under the wall and invading the city, there is this bodiless hand that writes on the wall. And Belshazzar is completely wigged out by it. They bring Jeremiah in, and he says, "You've been weighed in the balance and found wanting." Oh, wow. And you're done. And so they were. And so that's how Babylon ends. Okay, so that's the introduction to the book, and I might as well stay up here, I guess. Looking at the clock, we have about 10 minutes left, so what we can do is we can entertain any comments, questions, and get right into chapter 1. If I can figure out how to get out of this. Any thoughts? Anything on your mind? Well, why are you acting like this? Well, all right, well. Okay, well, I don't see any hands up, so let's move on into chapter 1. And we'll see a lot of stuff that we'll read in chapter 1 we've already kind of discussed in the introduction here. Let's see if I unplug that. I did have a couple of Bible verses I wanted to read to you. Here we go, finally. Okay. All right, so that'll work. All right, so let's start reading in Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 1. He says, "The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, the priest of the Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of Jehovah came in the days of Josiah." So this would be the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It came also in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month. Okay, so that's a panoramic view of everything that we're about to look at, from beginning to end. Now, verse 4, he says, "Now the word of Jehovah came to me, Jeremiah, saying, Before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. And before you came forth of the womb, I sanctified you. I have appointed you a prophet unto the nations." Well, I know that some of our Calvinist friends would turn here and say, okay, see, this is how this works. This is how this total hereditary and let's go through our TULIP acronym. Total hereditary depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, TULIP, perseverance of the saints. That's the TULIP. That's a good memory aid. And so they say, okay, see, he's just, his future's determined before he's even born. Well, we could read the same thing about Samson. We could read the same thing about the Apostle Paul. We could read in Romans chapter 9 if it was our objective in this study, and we could do it if anybody wants to, but to see how all this works. If you look through the book of Jeremiah, it is obvious that Jeremiah has the choice, the personal choice as to what step he takes. God has chosen this individual to do this work over other individuals, no doubt. But he was not without his own personal choice as to whether or not he was going to go through with these things. Again, it would be a good study of the predestination type stuff, but I don't know. I feel like that we're all pretty versed in that. And actually, we could just pause right now and completely explain it if anybody needs to. I'm ready. I'm prepared. If you're kind of confused about that, if you've heard people talk about that, hey, God determines before people even born that they're going to go to heaven, and determines that others are going to go to hell, and there's not a thing anybody can do about that. So if you're just determined for hell, it don't matter what you do in this life. That's your lot. Others, unconditional election. Nothing you did, you're going to heaven. That is so silly. It's almost like we don't feel like we really need to talk about it. But Don, go ahead.
Well, going a little bit further back, the country of Judah, they had gone through at first, a rather bad king, Manasseh, and God had, probably in 2 Chronicles is where you're going to find it, had promised them, had told them, and sent prophets to tell them, okay, Manasseh has straightened himself out, and he's turned back to God. But the things that he did and the things that you did under him, it's over with. I'm going to have to punish you for these things. So they had a curse on them all the way from Manasseh. That even though Josiah was somewhat of a good king, even though he made a mistake later in life, that they were going to get it. That it was just a matter of time. He withheld that punishment until after Josiah. But they already had a curse from God that what they had been doing and the evil and the blood that Manasseh had shed in the streets of Jerusalem, innocent blood, that they had to be punished.
Okay. The way I probably would word it is Jeremiah is going to explicitly state what Judah's sin is, and it's obvious that the impact of Manasseh and all the deep dark wickedness of his reign didn't go away. Its influence continued, and Judah continued in this, in idolatry and in sorcery and all these things. So they were going to get what was their just reward for what they were doing. And of course, Manasseh was a lot of the problem there, the guilt. Verse 60 says, "Then said I, oh, Lord Jehovah, behold, I know not how to speak." This is Jeremiah saying, God says, I want you to go and do this. I don't know how to speak. I'm a child. But Jehovah said to me, "Say not, I am a child. For to whomsoever I shall send you to, there shall you go. And whatsoever I shall command you, that you shall speak." Okay, now later we'll find Jeremiah getting discouraged, and we read that where God says that. If you can't run with the footmen, how are you going to contend with the horses? In other words, look, I chose you. You've got a work to do. Don't tell me you're a child. Does this remind you of somebody else in the Bible? God gives them a work. They said, can't do it, can't speak, I'm just not able. Moses, yeah. Same way. And maybe we've found ourselves in those kind of situations, where something had to be taken care of, and you convince yourself you're not the man to do it. You're not the woman to do it in whatever situation. And God says, yes, you are. You're my man of the hour. You're my woman of this situation here. And you have to take a stand. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Again, I like it because what do these types of verses do? They infuse us with confidence. They infuse us with a knowledge and understanding of the expectations of God. And the last thing I want to do, and I know the last thing you want to do, is disappoint God. So stand. Do my work, God says. Be not afraid, verse 8, because of them, for I am with you to deliver you, said Jehovah. Then Jehovah put forth his hand and touched my mouth, and Jehovah said unto me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have this day set over the nations, set you over the nations, and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down and to destroy and to overthrow and to build and to plant. So we're about to do some things, Jeremiah, that much of the world has never seen. It's going to be pretty gruesome, and then we're going to build things. Moreover, the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what do you see? And I said, I see a rod of almond tree. Then said Jehovah to me, you have well seen, for I will watch over my word to perform it. Let's see, what time we have a couple of minutes here. So he's given two visions to give him this confidence. I'm with you. And he sees this almond, rod of an almond. From what I understand, the almond tree breaks dormancy in around January, which is one of the earliest ones. And by this illustration, he's saying that what I am saying to you is just as sure as the almond tree breaking dormancy. This tree is the first to do it. And so once that happens, we know that spring is on its way. And the second vision, he says, and the word of Jehovah came unto me the second time, saying, what do you see? And he said, I see a boiling cauldron, and the face thereof is from the north. Then Jehovah said unto me, out of the north evil shall break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land. For lo, I will call all the families of the kingdoms of the north, said Jehovah, and they shall come, and they shall set every one his throne at the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem, and against all the walls thereof round about, and against all the cities of Judah. And I will utter my judgments against them, touching all their wickedness, in that they have forsaken me, and have burned incense unto other gods, and worshipped the works of their hands. Okay, so here's their problem. They have forsaken God. And that Hebrews 10, 24, 25, 26 passage comes to mind, don't forsake the assembly. And how best to understand that? Well, we want to see how this word is used all over the place. And all we do is give definitions. And here the idea is to give up, to renounce, to leave altogether, to abandon, to leave, or apostatize. So that is a definition. It's not a completed definition. But I think it helps me to see that if something happened and somebody missed the assembly and somebody points the finger at him and says, you forsook the assembly. Let's talk about what that means before we get ourselves into this nutty mode where we're accusing everybody where God doesn't accuse. So, as I always say, words have meanings, and I can't make up my own meanings for these words. And unfortunately, I think that things happen in years gone by that make current environments exist. And as long as people don't do their own personal research, then they're always going to be preaching the convictions of some other guy. But at any rate, I think that's very helpful. So they had forsaken God. They had apostatized. And he says in verse 17, I'm looking at the clock, I'm out of time. I better stop. Okay, well, we'll mark verse 17. And I feel like I was kind of rushing through there a little bit. I was kind of wanting to finish chapter 1, but that's okay. We've got lots of time, no time frame on this, and so there will be some of the studies where we take huge chunks and others where we may spend a little bit more time. And I think that probably all of us will dictate how the class goes. If people want to spend a little bit more time talking about one thing, then we certainly can do that. But it's going to be a great study, and we're looking forward to it.